Let's dive into part two, where the guys wrap up their talk on Russian capabilities and dive into Ukraine's resilience.
I know you are desperate to talk about the commanders, Don.
Yeah, so the three Russian Black Sea Flotilla commanders, and it's always worth looking at who's in charge of coordinating operations because military organizations are funny, and the assumption that the best qualified will always be put in charge is something
Which is not true at all, ever.
Nope.
it's often the least qualified, least intelligent, most likely to cut himself on plasticine, who will be given responsibility. So just a fast look at Black Sea Flotilla commanders. Onset of the war, and you'll have to excuse pronunciation, especially if you're Ukrainian. I really am sorry about this. Igor Ospinov. So this is a guy who spent what time he did at sea on surface ships, mostly corvettes, Grisha class top. So, legacy corvettes, submarine, not a lot of sea time, to be fair. Lots of staff appointments, sure. He was probably sacked after loss of the Moscow. His relief was Victor Sokolov, another surface warfare guy. Okay. Apart from a brief spell on a frigate, he was mostly mine countermeasures. So what in the Royal Navy we call a small ships guy. Commanded individual minesweepers and then a squadron of them. Went on various staff appointments, 2 flotilla commands. And again, Russian ships don't go to sea very often. So that would have been a lot of time alongside. Then interestingly, despite being a mine countermeasures guy, he took command of the Kuznetsov battle group of Syria. Now, I'm not sure how that works. That a mine countermeasures guy should be suddenly put in charge of a carrier battle group.
Sounds like family connections, doesn't it?
Well, it does to me.
Yeah, I mean, he would have been supremely unqualified for that, even if he went through various staff war colleges. This was not his bag at all. Further 2 years as commanding officer, Franz Naval Academy, and then took over from your man Oskipov on 17th of August.
Which is my birthday.
Oh, well, you guys share.
Many happy returns, comrade. That's my best estimate. Probably binned, of course. And then February 2024, Sergei Pinchuk, he remains current CO. Another surface warfare guy, gunnery officer. Spent 10 years on one ship. A Sovremeni destroyer. So he kind of worked his way up. Now, this is very much in keeping with Russian naval practice, that they like their officers to stay on one platform. That's what it could indicate. Or it could indicate he was a bit of a fucking idiot, to be honest, and was just going nowhere and they just kept him on board. But he worked his way up to CO, usual promotion courses, went Chief of Staff, Baltic Surface Fleet, Commanding Officer 150th Brigade. That's a squadron of fast attack boats, I think. Chief of Staff, and then XO of Leningrad Naval Command, and then finally Commander-in-Chief Caspian Flotilla. Assumed command, like I said, Commander-in-Chief Black Sea Flotilla. I mean, Hop, what are your impressions of this choice of 3 COs?
Well, I feel like they're yes men. This second guy, he didn't seem to do any mine countermeasure stuff, and number 3 just seems like a complete toady. So, I mean, am I wrong? Am I missing something here? I know they checked all the boxes, but we've all seen that with guys that get promoted, just because they've they've been to this school and that school, but they just haven't distinguished themselves in any way, shape, or form in any of these schools.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think even commanding Kuznetsov battle group off Syria, that whole battle, that you'd probably get a medal for it in NATO, but he essentially,
Well, it went very poorly. I mean, they lost aircraft. The thing broke down all the time.
yeah, they lost at least one jet, didn't they?
Yeah, several, I think. Two. One for now. I take that back. I know they lost one off the pointy end, and I think they lost the second one in recovery. But that's that's not necessarily the skipper's fault.
Yeah. So, I mean, my impression is not a lot of sea time, not a lot of experience, and then if we throw in all the factors that we said, unrealistic training, lack of cooperation probably with other arms in joint exercises, linear exercising, excessive amount of time alongside. I think these boys are probably figureheads, given higher direction from Moscow, and told just to get on with it. I mean, the first guy, let's send a cruiser without a frigate or even a corvette running shotgun, and we'll stick it inside the known threat area for Neptune or Harpoon. Well, I mean, day one, lesson one of not being a fuckwit as a commander-in-chief. That's diabolical. None of so far have shown any appetite to kind of adapt to the threat.
No, they seem to be behind, always behind. They haven't. I think you said earlier the opportunity to stiffen the defensive against USVs around your ships hasn't been. They haven't executed that. They haven't mounted a bunch of 12.7s and various positions and come up with a way to tactically operate in an area where USVs might be. They don't seem to be doing any of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just from the point of USVs, it's taken 2 years to go. Actually, what we can do is we can use helicopters to provide an outer screen, and we'll stick in the sources a video of that actually working in practice, although very dangerously, where the hip flying overhead is shooting and a Makarov on the horizon is shooting a gun at the same time, which, even in wartime breaches all kinds of foul range restrictions. But yeah, they're just inability to adapt quickly. And then when they finally start using helicopters, what do they AFU do? Well, they start sticking surface to air missiles.
Yeah.
On board.
It's an amazing countermeasure, isn't it?
And well, just the fact that they were able to make it work is, I mean, there's so many factors in keeping an IR missile operational for any length of time. I mean, keeping one thing would be, how do they keep salt from spray from building up on the housing for the IR seeker head, because that will really degrade your ability to track stuff. It's just, I mean, I know we're going to talk about that later, but it still got me scratching my head. I can't wait to figure out how they did it.
Yeah, so Black Sea Flotilla commanders, not much sea experience, no warfighting experience. Political appointees chosen for reliability. Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment and reflected in tactics at the moment. They continue to be very risk averse.
Yes, they've been completely defensive for 24 months now, maybe more.
I think the last mass raid they did fire 24 caliber from West Black Sea. So I think that was a major. That was the last count that I saw. So that was a major effort for them. But from what range? If you do it from 400 miles away, I do wonder if that was a bit of a surprise to the AFU, and they're concentrating operations around Crimea, and maybe they've tailed off looking at the South Black Sea. But that's a trick the Russians will be able to pull once, I think. Maybe they've been launching from the very busy coastal trade off Turkey. I always thought that was a possibility, to be honest, to kind of get some platforms in amongst civilian shipping and just make it a little bit more difficult to go after with USVs. So I don't know. We will see. But it's intermittent, isn't it? It's not repeated. They are by no means constantly operating in the Black Sea. They're just kind of launching forays, which, given their numbers, is mental, really.
They did these little sorties with, a corvette and 2 patrol boats. But one thing the Russians have always done is, given their smaller ships, and we alluded to this earlier, a fairly heavy weapons loadout. Maybe not deep magazines, but they've sort of pioneered the whole corvette with a long range missiles on it concept, and the West sort of came along to that a little bit later on.
It's sort of a bit of a show pony in some ways, though, isn't it? If you're doing this for show, i.e., you've got a fair number of whatever missile systems are, and low magazine numbers. What does that really tell you?
Just it's for show, and part of the ineffectual terror campaign that the Russians think is going to work against the Ukrainian people. And as Russian air defense, Ukrainian air defense has become more and more sophisticated. Now a lot of missiles get through, and calipers are a fairly effective weapon, and with a big warhead. But the shoot down rate, even on those, amazes me. And it only gets a little better and a little better over time.
I think it's kind of worth pointing out, though, that I don't know how far the pendulum swings, but if you look at a river class patrol vessel, offshore patrol vessel that the Royal Navy's got, and then a 22160 that the Russians have got. All right, so the weapon systems and the radar systems on the Russian ship are not all that, but the armament on a river class patrol vessel for the Royal Navy is a 30mm gun, and probably a pair of 50 cows. On a 22160, it's a 76mm gun. You've got room for vertical launch missiles, either caliber or a SAM system. You got a pair of 14.5s. You've got grenade launchers. They're looking at module fittings, so you can fit additional SAMs on there, or torpedoes. They may be able to modular fit towed array sonar on there. So, it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? A Russian corvette, if you made the weapons and the sensors better, and then you put that up against a river class corvette of the Royal Navy, well, I know what I'd rather be on, to be honest with you. We've got an awful lot of very comfortable, good long range offshore patrol vessel there, but it's only got a 30mm on the front. They've got a system that can launch land attack missiles. Yeah, maybe we need to start thinking less about conditions on board and more about, do we want warships to go and fight?
Yeah.
What does the 30mm even do at sea?
Well, in the hands of someone like me, not a lot. Yeah, it's purely for stopping smugglers, and that's about it. It's for show. It's just a gun on the front. Can you fit a lot more on a Corvette? If you're willing to forego creature comforts and things like that, then yeah, of course you can. But the Royal Navy would turn around and say, well, do I need a 76mm gun and vertical launch missile system to do fishery protection around the UK? No, absolutely, you're right. That would be a little bit of overkill, because we're not going to start sinking Belgian trawlers. But the Royal Navy is now using these globally. There's one running around the Far East. There's one forward based in Gibraltar. So if we're going to use them for flag showing, do you want your grey painted warship to be able to do something useful in wartime? Because she ain't going to be doing fishery protection. That won't be happening in a major conflict. So yeah, it's been another bugbear of mine. If the Royal Navy is strapped for cash, then I think that's one area where we should be looking to get maximum gain out of platforms, and saying, look, do we want fishery patrol, or do we hand it over to civilian government and invest the money in proper warships? Because what's a river class going to do in the invasion of Taiwan?
Think.
Yeah, with Able Seaman Blogs at the front on his 30 mil.
Yeah. He got 3 rounds off before. Yeah. So yeah, they need to really look at the lethality of these smaller warships. And I'm not trying to give the Russians any credit, but they stuff every weapon system they can onto their ships as a rule of thumb.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at a river class, I mean, it's got a big flat area on the stern. Well, what are we doing with that? They're not going to embark a helicopter. That's not happening. It's just a vast space. So the 30 mil at the front, it takes up virtually no room. I think if you look at it that way, the Russians got the right idea with some of the kit. Cram lots of weapons and sensors on it. Their problem is the weapons and sensors are not
Don't work.
good. Yeah, but we could certainly do better. A box launch SAM system, even light anti-ship missiles these days, they are light. You could put them on. Anyway, you're not going to put phalanx on the thing, obviously, but there's a lot of wasted space on these things.
What about the anti-drone microwave technology or something along those lines for protection against drone swarms?
Yeah, I mean, directed energy weapons are going to be one of the solutions to things like UAVs, but I think for uncrewed surface vessels, they're not going to be much use at all, unless you can dazzle the optical sites. Because of course, things like Magura, they're positively controlled at the moment. So there's someone sat ashore and he's directing the USV onto target, but he needs a camera to do that. Directed energy weapon is going to wipe out your optics. That's going to make it a lot harder. But completely independent USVs will be the next one. Same as, like Brimstone. You fire a salvo of Brimstones into a box, you just let them go, and then they'll go and hunt their own targets. USVs will eventually be the same, either through the use of AI or whatever.
Well, just target recognition stuff. You can sort of bridge that gap with existing technology. When the operator identifies, that he's got a whatever class, Rapuchka, he just allows the onboard target recognition system, which exists on a lot of different missiles and everything else already, and switches over to that. And whether they dazzle the camera or not starts to become a lot less important if you can have some hardened sensors.
Yeah, I mean, your ultimate nightmare is USVs with Brimstone and Martlet on board.
Oh, yeah.
Because then they're going to be doing standoff attacks, and they're still going to carry a 200-pound warhead in the nose. So, suddenly getting 4, 8, 12 Brimstones shot at you from 2 miles away. I mean, you're screwed, essentially.
Yeah. And it's running in on you at 25 knots, 30 knots. You have no time.
Yeah, you're dealing with, let's say, let's be generous, out of 24 Brimstones fired up from the USV ambush line, only 4 hit you. You're now in a damage control situation, so you're trying to deal with that. And now you've got 4 or 5 USVs barreling in. You might have lost all power. You might have lost radar. You had a helicopter up, but that's gone off because Brimstone has an anti-air capability. So does Martlet. So your overhead rotary wing cover went off, disappeared, and then suddenly you got walloped by a salvo of only a few pounds. I don't even know how much brimstone weighs, but just the kinetic damage alone is going to cause you some serious issues. And then on top of that, now you've got the USVs doing a final terminal run on you.
Yeah, it's a problem without a great solution right now. I mean, and I don't care how many guns you put on the on a ship, how many 50 cals. As you said earlier, if that thing gets within 75 feet, which is obviously not a lot, but that detonation is going to do a lot to your ship. And I don't care how big it is, it's going to put a big dent in things. It's going to knock some systems offline if you're a big ship, if you're a small ship. It may be the end of it.
Royal Navy needs to reintroduce 16-barrel pom-poms.
I was on the Belfast last week looking at where they had those in some of the film footage, and I do love that weapon.
Yeah, but there would have been a use for that in 1982. These systems, I don't know, the wheel turns.
Ukrainian capabilities to counter Russian naval dominance. And now, Tim, you're going to talk about Harm and Storm Shadow.
Yeah, so we'll go with Storm Shadow first because it rolls on from the Kilo class, because they use one to, you can't say sink a submarine when it's in a dry dock, but yes, the Kilo class Rostov-on-Don met its maker in a dry dock at the hands of a Storm Shadow missile. So Storm Shadow is a standoff air-launched cruise missile, and it was developed for use against hardened and buried targets. It weighs about 1,300 kilos, about 5 meters long, wingspan about 3 meters when the wings are extended, and it's powered by a small turbine engine. There are different ranges quoted for it, between 250 and 550 Ks, depending on what source you care to look at. And there was an RAF publication in 2013 that came out with the 550 kilometer range. So it's somewhere in that window. Guidance is either by GPS and inertial navigation, or a system called terrain profile matching, which is abbreviated to TERPROM. It flies to its target at low level. It can utilize terminal maneuvers in the terminal phase. And rather like Tomahawk, it can be pre-programmed with a route of flight to utilize things like terrain avoidance and terrain masking. It's got an infrared sensor, and that is used to guide it to its impact point. And this uses a technique called image recognition terminal guidance system. And it is very, very accurate. And it's so accurate that Battle Damage Assessment has seen a second missile fly into a target through the hole made by the first missile. As I say, the route to target is pre-programmed using computer software. It has a very sophisticated warhead called Broach, and that uses a precursor charge followed by the main charge. So the precursor charge, if you like, is used to punch through the target's defenses, and then the main charge goes through and explodes inside the target. So it's a bit like the warhead on a Stingray torpedo. Dom, I don't know if you got similar on US torpedoes that you would carry on the P3 Hop.
Yeah, we on the Mark 46s and on the follow-on to that, they one of the fusing options was that.
Yeah. It's got a very sophisticated fusing system, which has proved hugely effective in service, and the warhead's about 450 kilograms. It's been fitted to Ukrainian Su-24s, probably using pylons from decommissioned tornadoes. Speed en route about Mach 0.95, so it's just subsonic. The Terprom system actually uses US-owned cartographic data, and this was stated by the former UK Secretary of State for Defence, Ben Wallace, in an interview to BBC Radio 4 in November last year. The system was first used in the Iraq War in 2003 by a 617 Tornado Squadron. It was actually rushed into service for that conflict. It was later used in Libya and has been used against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. They were first delivered to Ukraine in summer of 2023, and they've been used to hit various targets, including industrial targets in the Luhansk area. And on the 12th of June 2022, General Sergei Gorbachev, the commander-in-chief of 35th Combined Arms Army, was killed by a Storm Shadow strike. Some rail bridges, including the Changa Strait rail bridge linking Crimea to Kherson, and of course the Kilo class, the Rostov-on-Don, and the Rapushka Minsk in May 2023. And of course, as we were talking earlier, the Black Sea Fleet HQ in Sevastopol, and that was hit by a Storm Shadow missile. So that's Storm Shadow. Any questions on that?
I think Sevastopol HQ was twice, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Scalp is, when people talk about Scalp, that's just the French equivalent of Storm Shadow, and Taurus is the German equivalent. I think there's some slight differences, but basically, when you hear people talk about Storm Shadow, Scalp, Taurus, more or less the same weapon system.
You brought up an interesting point with the TERP, though. If it's using American mapping data, then is that possibly the reason that there was a stop put on what Storm Shadow was able to do? Because we initially just said you can hit whatever you want.
Yeah, in this interview that Ben Wallace gave, he just sort of said, well, the Terprom system uses US data, and we've just got to have their permission, to use it to its full extent.
UK's just started lofting satellites that can do that, though, haven't we?
Yeah.
It does ask a question about the Scalp, though, isn't it? Because the claims are that the Scalp is completely free of any other outside influence on what they can do. So what's the difference then? There's the question.
Probably just that the French have got their own
mapping system.
Yeah, their own mapping system, because they do like to be a bit more independent, don't they?
Yeah. There's a naval version of Scalp as well, though, isn't there?
Yeah, which I think is longer ranged. Might be longer ranged, but yeah, they have got a naval version.
And of course, so the warhead is something I know a reasonable amount about. Really, it's quite interesting. Of course, the first part is designed to breach through concrete and reinforced concrete, and then in actual fact have a blast inside wherever you've got, right? So they're two completely different explosive packages, really. And it's quite impressive. In actual fact, one of the things when we talk, because part of this conversation is about the Kirsch Bridge. I had a real look at Kirsch Bridge, and when I hadn't realised how accurate Storm Shadow was, and I just suddenly went, well, why is everyone talking about hitting piers, etc.? And in actual fact, Storm Shadow would be really useful to hit a pier, but there is zero need to hit a pier with Storm Shadow. You would just hit that big bowstring. If you're looking at the Kirsch Bridge and the main area, the main area bit, and it's called a bowstring because it looks like a bow. Those huge bits of metal that go through it, you would just fly your Storm Shadow down along following the road or the railway, and then just hit one of the sides of that bowstring. Once you've taken down put a big hole in it, you'll get a mechanical failure, and the whole weight of it would just topple over. It would take the whole bridge down. You don't
Yeah.
need to do anything really, really complicated. I was looking at it, I was going, I did not know they were that accurate.
Yeah, this infrared image matching system is just apparently delivered phenomenal accuracy and do things like you're just describing there.
It might. I mean, if that's the most accurate way of getting a storm shadow on target, though, that might explain why they haven't gone after Kerch, because the Russians use a lot of multi-spectrum smoke. It's kind of a thing that they've really been into for warships. That's why you see that black streak, that black streak down the side of the hull at the stern. They've really gone in for smoke screens. So, and they go for generated smoke as a missile countermeasure. So, is that the reason that they haven't gone after Kerch again? Simply because this multi-spectrum smoke decoy system actually works?
Can they deploy it quickly enough? If you've got something coming in at almost the speed of sound, right? Will they be able to deploy it quickly enough at that height where the bowstring is, which is, I'm making a guess here, at 35, 40 meters above sea level?
Yeah, I mean, that depends on raid warning time, doesn't it? Figure 5 minutes to get a smoke screen down. The other thing about Kerch, of course, is one of the Russians' S-500 batteries is supposed to be based there. I do wonder if this is one system that might actually be quite good, and therefore that's one of the reasons that Kerch has been left alone. But the S-500 system is actually pretty capable. I don't know. You simply don't know with, pamphlet claims about capability, but S-500 will be an AFU primary target, and the fact they've not gone after the battery covering Kerch would suggest that this is a system that the juice isn't worth the squeeze, if you know what I mean. It may take quite a lot of scalp and storm shadow to kill it.
Yeah, and we don't know what their numbers are really.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in terms of you've got the question is the numbers that were needed for the numbers that hit it, right? Very few, but you've got to, of course, take into account the numbers you'd have to use to get those numbers going to get into it, right? So I'm guessing, I'm just making a guess, right? But I think it would be a relatively accurate guess that you would need no more than 2 to be hitting within about 6 feet of each other, and that bowstring is gone. So, I mean, there's the other question is that maybe they just don't want to take it down. Maybe they want to keep that bridge up for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, why Kerch hasn't been dropped is an enduring question. Clearly, the appetite was there, because of the USV attack on it, and they've gone after it subsequently with it might be an ATACMS. But they hit it again and they knocked out 2 lanes. Is the damage sufficient that the load bearing capacity of the bridge has been knocked back enough to make it just not worth it? I mean, we saw the damage, didn't we? The fire damage, because the fuel bowsers were hit. I mean, if you remember, someone filmed some of the supports on the railway side of the bridge.
They did.
And massive cracking, obvious heat damage, and yet the Russians said, well, yeah, it's up and it's working as normal. I'm starting to wonder if a bridge isn't really that important anymore, that it's a light railway system only.
So it has been suggested that there has not been as much traffic going over that bridge as it was beforehand.
I don't think it has the strategic importance it once did, and it may serve Ukraine's ultimate purposes to keep it up until they liberate Crimea, which I think eventually will happen. If for no other reason to give the bad people a way out initially, and if they decide to flee. More on the civilian side, obviously, the civilian Russians that have inhabited there, but it'd be a lot easier if they were just gone when he came in. I wonder about that. No one really knows because they certainly have tried to take it out. I just don't think it's as important anymore. And I think the rail ferries were the ones doing the heavy lifting as far as equipment and fuel.
Yeah, so you might think, in actual fact, if you were really wanted to reduce their ability to get stuff onto Crimea, then that's what you might be wanting to target instead, isn't it?
Shall we scoot on to harm?
Please do.
Okay, so AGM-88 high-speed anti-radiation missile. Most of my info for this, we'll put this in the sources, came from an interview, a YouTube channel called 10% True, that does a lot of really good aviation stuff. Interviewed a guy called Mike Starbaby Petruka back in September 2022. And this guy's an XF4G Wild Weasel and Strike Eagle Weasel. It qualified just before the Gulf War in 1990. Missed out the Gulf War, but did a lot of sorties during the no-fly zone operations that came after the war. So it's developed in the 80s to replace the Shrike anti-radiation missile that was used in Vietnam. Shrike had a lot of limitations, but that's another discussion. Speed I've seen quoted for harm is Mach 1.84, but I've heard it being talked about up to Mach 3. I don't know what anyone else has heard the speed for harm being quoted at.
Mach 3 is the number I've heard.
Yeah, I was doing the research and I was like, oh, that's interesting because everywhere else I'd heard like Mach 3. Range can be up to 80 nautical miles. It's believed that Ukraine got AGM-88B, which has been proven in combat against Russian threat radars, most notably in Gulf War 1991, and it's been fitted to the MiG-29 and Su-27. So how the harm works in the Ukraine theatre, it's believed, is the missile is fitted with a thing called an EPROM, EPROM, and that stands for electronically programmable read-only memory. Now, this is pretty dated technology, EPROM stuff back to the 80s. And basically your EPROM that you put into the missile contains all the threat emitter profiles that you might want the missile to go after. And this fellow that was interviewed, he said that the what was called Block 2 software for the EPROM would be sufficient for Ukraine, but you can program the EPROM however you want. So you could just do a Block Ukraine, as he called it, to operate in the Ukrainian theatre. Just because it's quite an old weapon system, it doesn't mean it's bad, because if old works, it will do the job. All the programming for the EPROM, you do that on the ground before you go flying. It's not anything that you have to do in the air with regard to the EPROM. What you do need to fit the harm missile to a MiG-29 or an Su-27 or anything is a pylon called the Launcher Assembly Unit 118/A. And to fit that to the aircraft, it's just a mechanical, engineering exercise of putting the bolts and the lug joints in the right place to attach it to the wing. To get the missile to fire, you just need an arming pulse, don't you, Hop? And that's just a matter of supplying the missile with the right millivolts, milliamps, to get it to launch off the aircraft. So technically, although we might think, oh, this is, amazing, they've put harm on a MiG-29 Su-27, when you break it down to the EPROM and the actual physically, how do you attach it to the aircraft? How do you make it go whiz off the rail? It's not actually that complicated, because harm was fitted to aircraft like the F4 that were built before harm was developed. Same with the A6 and the A7. So fitting harm to an older aircraft, or for an aircraft that's not been developed to carry it, it had all been done before.
Very much a tried and true process. The engineers know what they're doing on that. The interactivity between the missile and the harm control panel is, a different matter, but that gets worked out on the older aircraft also.
Yeah. So that EEPROM means you don't need high-tech sensor systems to use the missile. And as we just said, it's been fitted to older aircraft like the A6 and A7 back in the day. There is a device called an ALEC, which is like a translator that's used to integrate the HARM missile with aircraft that weren't originally designed to carry it, like the F4. But when we've looked at pictures of HARM being fitted to Ukrainian aircraft, the ALEC's not there. So you'll have like the LAU 118A pylon, then you'll have the ALEC attached to the pylon, and then the HARM missiles attached to the ALEC. But in the photographs we've seen of HARMs paired with Ukrainian MiG-29s, this translator isn't there. So all of this really, it saves a lot of expensive and difficult aircraft modifications. I think it's actually breaking it down is a relatively simple thing to fit it to the MiG-29 Su-27.
I believe, and you might be getting to this, that I had heard that the harm was being operated in the borescope mode mostly especially on the MiG-29s because of that lack of an interface.
Yeah. So to fire the harm, it just needs a handoff, and that basically just tells it where to go and which radars to seek. So the way it's being used, they think, is as you were describing there, Hop. So the aircraft will fly to a specific place in the sky. You shoot the missile. You tell the missile, go to this point in the sky over where you think the enemy might have some radars. And if you see any of the radars that are programmed into the EEPROM, go and target them. The speed of harm has caused problems for the Russian air defenses in defending against it. And there are two problems that you face when you have a target flying at very high speeds, Mach 3 or hypersonic missiles. One of the first problems is the Doppler filters that you've got fitted to your radar. So we were talking about that earlier, moving target indication. So MTI, you can filter out stuff that isn't moving, like clouds or land returns, but you can also use it to filter out what you might think is jamming. And so one of the theories that's been proposed as to why systems like S300, S400 have not been able to deal with harm is that the Doppler filters are actually filtering it out because it's going, there can't be something going that fast. That's probably jamming. And the guy that was interviewed in this podcast has said that's actually something in his work when he was a Weezer in the F4G community. He's actually seen that in radar coding, in radar systems as a measure to counter jamming. Missile warhead fusing is your other problem against very high speed targets. If you haven't got the missile fusing right, your surface to air missile warhead will go off too late, and basically the target's already gone past. So
2,100 mile an hour. It'll have been a long way past, isn't it?
Yeah, because most surface to air missile systems now use blast fragmentation warheads, don't they? And you can see that if you've ever looked at the damage to the MH17 Malaysian 777 that was shot down when they reconstructed it. You can see all the damage to the front of the aircraft that was caused by the blast frag warhead. So yeah, you're going so fast that you've gone past the warhead before it's had a chance to go off. So those are the kind of two problems that you've got in defending against a weapon of that speed. In general, when it comes to SEAD, effective defense suppression occurs in the mind of the air defender, is the line that this guy used. So the job of harm is not necessarily to destroy a radar, but it's to make the operator switch off his radar. out of self-preservation. Interestingly, harm has a loiter time of between 60 and 90 seconds, possibly more, based on the range that you fire it at. And what that does is it gives your strike aircraft a time on target window to employ other weapons. And obviously, if you've got multiple harm shooters supporting your package, firing missiles at 60 seconds intervals, you can, sort of build up a 4 or 5 minute window for a strike package to come in and deliver a strike against whatever target's being defended, or against the missile site or radar site that you want to destroy. When you're doing SEAD with weapons like harm, there's a priority for hitting SAM sites, and there's this sort of typical way that the Russians set up a SAM system, isn't they? They have a radar, then you have your command vehicle, and then you have multiple trailer erector launchers, don't you? So you might have one or two radars, a command vehicle, and then you could have half a dozen or so TELs. When you're doing a harm strike, you want to shoot the radar as priority, and the reason for that is so you don't get shot on the way out again. After radar, you then go for the command vehicle, and then you go for your TELs. I did some threads a while ago on Twitter on SEAD, and I'll put a book in the references. I'll give it to Anna about the F4G Wild Weasel, the history, and it starts off with a bit of history of SEAD going back through to the start of the Second World War, and how the F4G came about, the other variants, F100s and F105s that were used for SEAD before it. Really interesting book if you're interested in SEAD, and there's some really good technical stuff in it as well if you like technical stuff. So we'll get that put in the reference. A really interesting read of the Wild Weasel F4G, Vietnam through to Gulf War I in 1991. Any questions on that?
I'm just going to say that I wonder if they've got their hands on the G version.
Maybe.
Because that's 160 miles. There are rumors that you have a air-to-air capability on that. Now that's just rumor, but having had a quick look, that kill of the A-50U over the Sea of Azov, to do that, if I could put an aircraft 60 miles south of Theodosia and it could carry harm, then I could go after an A-50U. And that's been a reoccurring suspicion in my head. Now I know that's a long reach, but I think a fencer could get that far, carrying one round and tanks. And if they knew where this thing was operating, could you put a fencer? I mean, we know that they've been hitting Russian air defense radar sites all along the south of Crimea, don't we?
Mm.
Yeah, they've cleared some pathways through there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a fencer could reach there, and he'd be running light. He'd be carrying one round, maybe two. Rest of his underwing stores are going to be tanks. Could he do it? Yeah, I mean, there was just an awful lot, but I mean, we don't know what happened to the A-50U over the Sea of Azov. There's no footage of it, but the footage of the one killed over land was very odd, really odd. And we'll put it in the sources. He was flying straight. He wasn't diving. He was popping flares at regular intervals, which makes no sense whatsoever, because
wouldn't have been an IR threat unless they package their flares and chaffs in the same, for when every time you pickle the countermeasures, it shoots out one flare, one chaff, and we might have been seeing the flare, but of course not seeing the chaff. I don't know what their setup's like. I have seen that setup on certain aircraft.
Yeah, and the other thing,
an awful lot about that footage that really made no sense whatsoever. I mean, maybe the WOP was just smashing his hand on the pedals, just out of sheer desperation. But if he was popping flares, that means he knew he was under attack.
Yes.
So either his IR warning sensor was going, or his radar sensor was going. But for it to have been an S-300 or a Patriot, he would have been positively illuminated. And that would have been happening from the moment of launch. So he'd have gone for the deck, wouldn't he?
If they had good situational awareness, he should have. I mean, it makes me think that either one of the two things, that it was a more passively guided weapon or a faster weapon that they weren't able to analyze real quickly, or incompetence.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it could be that he was screaming over the net. He was being illuminated. He saw that it was Panther or something like that, and he's shouting over the net, check fire on a friendly call sign, and he's banging his foot on the pedal, dropping flares and chaff anyway, just in case. But I don't know.
I don't know.
Really, it was a really weird, that one. But I've just got a gut feeling. All this talk of Frank and Sam and it was S-200, wasn't it? And Patriot, knowing how Patriot works, if it was Patriot, they would have had to have lost the round, not transmitting, purely passive, and
into a kill box. Yeah, I mean, that's my theory on if it were Patriot, they were doing some kind of data link targeting to get it into the vicinity, and then I don't know. I mean, maybe they figured out a way to, if the aircraft thought it was being eliminated by Panzer, maybe they were able to use the returns off of that. I don't know, with the data link, but something shot it down. I think any of those scenarios you trotted out there are possible. I just don't know which is more probable.
One thing I'd have to check is ARMs don't generally have a massively sized warhead. So
very small.
Yeah, so I'd probably, or I will have to go away and just have a look how big the warhead is in harm compared to something like Sparrow, AMRAAM, or Phoenix.
I think quite a bit smaller.
Yeah.
Phoenix. Oh, one thing about harm is, and you saw this a lot in Serbia, and then also in the Gulf War, when you shoot a harm, you're supposed to say Magnum.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, aircraft that don't have harm or that are being illuminated, or for whatever reason, will say Magnum on the radio in clear, and all the radars will get switched off.
Yeah, that's the line about effective SIAD happens in the mind of the operator.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right, before I sign off, I'll just spin my MPA debt I mentioned. So we're on a JMC, and I'm authenticating this Nimrod as the Force Marshaller. And you get 3 goes at authentication, don't you? And then it's like, if you fail 3 times, he's a spoofer, isn't he? So this MPA's joined, and he's failed authentication 3 times, and there's like this pause, and then he goes, I gotta let you into a secret. And I was like, what's that? And he goes, we're tasked both blue and orange forces on this sortie, and I'm looking at the wrong authentication. So I was like, make Pelican 1, 2, 3, 4, Snooper 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, classic. Loved it.
God.
Just for the people who are listening who are wondering what on earth we're laughing about, there used to be a thing called Nuco and Authentication, and it was a book, but it was 2 books, and you would keep it by you. And if you remember, when we talk about spoofing, getting yourself on the net, if you had doubts as to someone who suddenly appeared on a radio channel, you would authenticate them. Now, the problem with authentication was it was in an official publication, and it made something incredibly easy via instruction incredibly complicated. It was like a grid, and you would be given a free letter code, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and could either go down and then across, or you could go across and then down. but it didn't really matter because no one really understood what would happen. So you would be authenticate Delta Sierra Victor, and you go, I don't know, what do we do? Go down and across. All right. I authenticate Zulu Foxtrot Alpha. Pause. Uncomfortable pause. Authenticate Alpha Lima Tango. Fuck. Right, it must be the other way. Right, go across and then down. I authenticate uniform. Go Sierra. Uncomfortable pause. Authenticate. And then you get it wrong on the third one, and then everyone had chopped frequency. Bob's radar would come along. You go, why are we chopping TGHF? They fucking authenticated me 3 times. So you know how that works, you fucking idiot. And you go through the whole thing again. And if you wanted to be a real twat, even though you knew it was a friendly call sign, you'd be speaking to them 5 minutes, you know, and you'd be drop tap 1615. Channel away quite happily, and then you just go Sierra 6 Sierra Delta 4 Victor, authenticate Lima Charlie Alpha, and you can see the bloke at the other end of the net go wank.
In a JMC, 2 weeks in defence watches, little things like that get you through, don't they?
Yeah. It's the little things.
Yeah.
I'll talk a little bit about the anti-ship missiles like Neptune and Harpoon, and how the Ukrainians have used them to tremendous effect and with great innovation. The Neptune functions a little bit like the Harpoon. The Harpoon is it's the RGM-84 Harpoon. It's a air-breathing missile, has a range of about 120 miles if it's air-launched, 80 to 120 miles depending on your targeting. A little shorter if it's launched from sea, but the boosters that the Ukrainians have been developing, I think, have extended the ranges of these things significantly. What it shares with Neptune is the warhead. They're semi-armored piercing. They can be timed to pierce an outer hull and then go off. It's about 215 pounds of explosive. It's a good weapon in that it's very mature. It has a lot of ability to reject countermeasures, flares, chaff, jamming, and probably to a degree these really dense sort of metal flake filled smoke clouds that the Russians use for defense, which are actually, they're kind of known to be leaders in that field. Its brethren would be the R360 Neptune that has been developed by the Ukrainians, and they've probably manufactured somewhere between 100 and 150 of these, but they've been modifying them and modifying them and modifying them. It's a pretty big missile. It's about 16 and a half feet long. Initially, it had a range in the 100 to 120 mile range. Now that they've come up with an extended range version, which can go 190 miles, and they're talking about versions with a 400 kilometer and 1,000 kilometer range that are being developed. And a lot of that is due to increases in the amount of fuel and the booster capability to extend that range. They're constantly updating the seeker heads on these things. That the Harpoon has radar in it and an ability to recognize different superstructure shapes and things like that. The U.S. Navy's been using the Harpoon for decades. Probably at this point there's been north of 8,000 of these made. They've been deployed in combat multiple times. They work really well. They have different modes. They have a sea skimming mode, which comes in at the target at about 20 feet. They have another version with a pop-up mode that when it gets within a terminal distance to the ship target, it'll do a pop-up, climb up to about 1,000 feet and come down at a 30-degree angle to sort of challenge the defense systems to deal with the changes in its velocity vectors. The U.S. has also developed land-based versions of this, which you've seen the Ukrainians do also. The significance of these weapons is they deny the Russians the ability to operate in an area off the coast, because most of these are coastal launched via coastal launchers. But the Neptune, they've taken a step farther, and they've used that as a long-range offensive weapon too. And as Gunny pointed out earlier, these are the missiles, either the Neptune or the Harpoon. I tend to think it was the Neptune that took out the Moskva and have actually done damage to a bunch of other ships also. They've really slowly taken the Russian fleet and pushed it farther and farther south and from the Ukrainian coast. And then I think even they've sort of cut off some areas due south and in the western Black Sea. Gunny, you said you've been seeing sorties as recently as in the last few weeks on that large barrage in the western Black Sea.
Yeah, so reports for 24 caliber launched, but there was very little detail. I mean, of course, that could mean from the eastern Black Sea, but I kind of got the impression it was probably far south mid or west Black Sea, but that's unconfirmed.
Yeah, and they would do that to shorten the time of flight and to further challenge the air defenses for probably Odessa and other places. The calibers that Gunny was referring to there have an incredibly long range. I think it's 2,500 kilometers. They can really go a long way. The Harpoon and the Neptune don't have anywhere near that kind of a range, but they're highly capable and proven weapon systems, and they've really made the Black Sea a lot smaller for the Russians, and they're pretty effective. I believe they've sort of helped the situation in Odessa, but frankly, with the range of the calipers and some of the other weapon systems that the Russians are using, and they're relatively the impunity in which they don't really care what they hit. Those weapon systems, Neptune and Harpoon, and their anti-shipping capability have sort of seen their day in the sun, in the sense of knocking down the bombardment capabilities of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. So that's just a quick and dirty on anti-shipping missiles and how the role they've played in the Black Sea flotilla. Gunny, you want to throw anything else in there on Odessa as far as how these missiles have helped them?
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, you pretty much covered it. The thing is, they've pushed the Russian Navy off the coast. It's unfortunate that they couldn't put a battery on Snake Island, but Snake Island's been getting intermittently hit. It sounds like it's not being reported, but the Russians are occasionally smacking the island about with, I think the last strike was with kitchen missiles. So they clearly don't want any AFU batteries on there.
There's been reports of people when they're looking at the firm's data, that there are fires on Snake Island, right, which would maybe confirm that it's possible there some grass has caught fire, but that they are smacking it still.
Yeah, I'm convinced that the Russians will make a play for Snake Island again and try and.
Wow.
I think as any ceasefire and potential peace deal comes into effect, they'll do a last minute grab and try and hold it for the reasons that we talked about earlier. Its importance, Danube, future interdiction of Ukrainian maritime traffic, all of those kind of things. So I think they are interested in making sure that the Ukrainians don't have a presence there. how would they do it? It would be a big op, maybe an airborne drop, something like that. Could they even do that? I mean,
I
most,
don't know. It's a really small island. I mean, I think they could do a heliborne assault, perhaps.
yeah, I mean, we know that they can get hit that far because we saw that really weird, dodgy tape, didn't we, David?
Yeah.
We did.
Which was in itself just the most bizarre. For me, it kind of tied in with the reports that there being a mutiny on Snake Island. You know, we'll have to see. But yeah, anti-ship missiles have been absolutely key. They're going to be key in the future to Ukraine's maritime policy in the Black Sea. What do they need in the future? A lot of anti-ship missiles, preferably much longer range ones. P8 capability, maritime patrol aircraft, long-range maritime strike capability. Snake Island as a operating base, I think the concept of that is pretty much dead. The place will just keep getting knocked around even in the future wars. So corvettes, lots of fast attack boats, defensive minefields, maritime patrol aircraft, and long-range maritime strike. They're not going to be able to counter the Russian submarines because anti-submarine warfare is a dark art. It's people who say, well, the Ukrainians have got Sea Kings, and you know, if they've been given sonar, they can go hunting kilos. It doesn't work like that. It really doesn't. We in the anti-submarine warfare game for over 100 years. Your average success rate on board a ship against submarines remains pretty low, to be honest with you. The number of times that I've been out and an American or a US or a Dutch or a Norwegian boat has just run through the screen and sat underneath us and had a laugh watching us try and find it. You know, it's just going to be a perennial problem. Uncrewed underwater vessels, yeah,
That's different. Yeah.
yeah. That I know the American Orca program is carrying on a pace. That's got a payload bay on it. That might be a way in the future for the Ukrainians, and we know that they're experimenting with semi-submersible uncrewed surface vessels. So I'd watch out for that as well. But yeah, anti-ship missiles were always going to be a game changer, and the Russians just, I don't know. Again, Moscow, no one riding shotgun, no air cover, no A-50 that we know of down to the south. Walked into it.
Just naked and unafraid, and it amazes me. And then as these ranges extend to where they're operating 250 kilometers from the coast, I'm speaking of the ranges of the anti-shipping missiles. They're going to get to the edge of their ability to target pretty quickly, but that's a tremendous area of denial, and it really helps secure the future for southern Ukraine to keep it, basically safe from certainly Russian amphibious invasion when they get their act together 15, 20 years from now, if they're still in the same mode they are now. And also makes it a lot easier to liberate Crimea should that happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so David, what was the last subject we wanted to cover?
What are our learning outcomes about the Russian frailties?
Lack of a coherent plan, assumption that the war was going to be over very quickly, no contingency, failure to appreciate the threat of uncrewed surface vessels. The gunnery side of it is a huge thing for me. I'm all over that because I did a short gunnery course. And one of the things that the Russian Navy has really come unstuck on, and I don't think that they'd be alone in this if this was thrown at everyone else, is inability to defend against mass USV attacks.
One small, tiny, and then we'll move on. Additional thing I'd say to that is even if the helicopters start operating at a higher altitude and or not at all, and they go to a fixed wing protection packages for seaborne traffic, it's not going to change anything, because to have an effective search, you still need to be pretty low in a maritime patrol aircraft, say 1,000 feet or below, and they'll still be completely vulnerable. Fixed wing would be just as vulnerable to those missiles as a helo would be, and perhaps more so. So that was sort of the only comment I felt like was left unsaid with the seaborne USV anti-air capability.
Yeah, I mean, for me, if you're talking in terms of a carrier battle group, UAVs. So you want something maybe not as big as Global Hawk, but those kind of platforms that you can put out really good optics, really good radar, and put them at medium to high altitude, so they're out of range of, short range boat carried surface to air missiles. But it's just going to be a massive problem now. And again, I go back to, I hope that the powers of be are looking at this. The carrier group versus carrier group is still going to be a thing. And if the PLAN hit Taiwan and the US decides that they're going to contest it, it's going to be carrier group versus carrier group. It's going to be old school, brutal, sink me.
Oh yeah, there'll be subs involved. There'll be all sorts of crazy stuff. Yeah, the U.S. does field a couple systems now that are shipborne drones. I don't know if you've seen sort of that baby Jet Ranger helicopter that they call, I think it's called the Dragonfire. It's got a bunch of sensors hanging off it that will help with force protection from USVs. But that's just the first step, and they're going to need more, and they're going to have to set up an inner defense, a medium range defense, and an outer defense, just the way they used to do against submarines, or still do against submarines. You have the outer defensive zones.
And of course, we keep talking about the wheel turns. The Royal Navy's just gone to stage 2, looking at a uncrewed rotary wing platform with optics on it. And you see people say, "Wow, this is it. This is groundbreaking technology. That a new stage of naval aviation warfare." No, because if you look back to the 1970s, there was a thing called the Dash program.
Oh yeah, I remember
the Gearing class destroyers were flying Dash, which was a remotely piloted helicopter carrying a pair of Mark 46.
Yeah. Everything old is new again,
I also think that we need to start seriously looking at vulnerability alongside. Is it time to go back to boom defenses? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we're at the stage now where we have to start thinking about preemptive attacks, and 6, 8, 10 USVs let loose in Portsmouth Naval Base or Plymouth or San Diego or Norfolk Naval Base, they are going to kill a lot of platforms in terms of operability. They're not going to sink them, but they're not going to be available for a good few weeks. And I don't know about the U.S. Navy, but currently the Royal Navy's policy is an upper deck sentry with an assault rifle. That's
that's going to do a great job, isn't it?
Yeah. And the same as we need to start thinking about the UAV threat. A Type 45 destroyer and Arleigh Burke alongside. If I fly a UAV with a grenade-sized charge into 1046 radar or one of the SPY-1 aerials, that's it. And you can do that from Portsmouth. On the reverse side of the wall in Portsmouth Naval Base, there are high-rise civilian houses. So I can walk out on the balcony and go and do this. And with 4 UAVs, each with a grenade-sized charge on it, I can kill a Type 45 destroyer in terms of air defense capability. So if I can do that there, I can do that in Norfolk, do that in San Diego, I can do that in Mayport.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah, these are the things that we need to start seriously worrying about. Would the PLA do something similar in Pearl? Well, I mean,
I can't think of any reason why they wouldn't if it looked like we were coming to blows. And you have plausible deniability. That wasn't us.
Yeah.
You know?
And there's precedent for it. The only difference is here, you're not going to kill 2,000 American sailors, but you're going to knock out, if there are 2 carriers alongside and 6 Arleigh Burke, there you go. There's your 2 carrier battle group not sailing from Pearl. Nothing is nothing. What has it got? Did it have Chinese flags on it? No. Don't blame us for something.
Yeah. Sorry, could have been jihadists for all you guys know. Blame somebody else.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Taiwan will be decided in 7 to 10 days. So, that's your immediate response gone. Doing it in Japan, probably a little bit harder, but David, you can go on Google and look at RAF Lossy map, and you see typhoons lined up on the dispersal, don't you?
Still, you can still see them. Yes.
Now, 2 Russian trawlers, each carrying 6 UAVs, each with a grenade-sized charge. There you go. There's a sizable portion of the RAF's Typhoon force killed. I just wonder how aware we are of how easy it would be to knock us back long enough to carry out an act of stupidity and insanity. Can we block off Portsmouth and Plymouth with boom defenses and things like that? Well, no, obviously. Do we need that ability in case? Well, military history is littered with cases of, well, we could have done, but we didn't think we needed to, and now we're fucked. Yeah. Should we be investing in things like that? Yeah. Should we be looking at introducing no-fly zones over military facilities? Absolutely. Should we be coming up with ways to knock down UAVs kinetically? Yeah. Of course we should. Should we be introducing exclusion zones where military facilities are on the coast? Yeah, absolutely. Because they're not going to play by the rules. They're going to clobber us really hard and really fast. And we will have no one to blame but ourselves in terms of unmanned platform. These things are real game changers. And that's before we even get into the uncrewed underwater vessels.
Oh, yeah. I mean, God knows where that's going to take us, either as detection platforms or anti-submarine. I mean, what's the best way to hunt a submarine is with another submarine. And now you make it an unmanned one. Well, talk about game changers.
And you don't need the unmanned one. You don't have to worry about people having to breathe oxygen and the many other benefits of not having people on board, right? Suddenly you've got your endurance underneath. You don't have to come up, and
it's cheap and disposable in a larger sense, and that's that's sort of the key to the whole drone thing. I mean, I think some of the weaknesses really quickly that have been exposed is we need, even though the Western forces do a really good job with hardened comms and tactical data link, that has to be continued to be enhanced. And the net-centric warfare idea needs to now go from theoretical to how do we deploy, a line, deploy and control and staff, as far as keeping the human touch on a fleet, a line of 20 USVs. How do we defend, against the airborne threat? I mean, there are cheap fixes. Bunkers are relatively cheap compared to the cost of an airframe. Booms are super cheap compared to the cost of a ship. The kinetic and non-kinetic systems that need to be deployed at Army bases, Navy bases, Air Force bases, they're cheap compared to one aircraft. I mean, you could probably supply the entire west coast of the United States with a viable drone defense, electronic drone defense for the cost of one F-16. And we have to start looking at that. The ships, when they go out, they're going to have deeper magazines because they're so at risk when they alongside. We're going to need to develop a new generation of sub-tenders for these USVs. We're going to need when ships do go out, they're going to need to have more ability to launch ISR drones and lots of them to protect themselves. And Britain and the United States and France and Germany, we need to enhance our shipbuilding capabilities. All that stuff needs to happen. And shipbuilding and ship repair, because there's a storm on the horizon, in my opinion.
Yeah, you won't get any arguments from me, and I suspect not from Gunny.
No, we're just doing what we always do, which is we're not thinking forward, and we're not willing to invest. An example of it is for you, David, Northern Ireland Snatch Land Rovers, unfit for purpose. Everyone knew it. They stuck armor plating on them. Then the Provos started using armor piercing rounds. Nobody likes Snatch Land Rovers, so we decided to go into Sangin province. The British government say it's a peacekeeping operation, and we anticipate that it will be over really quickly. Every sane head in HQ Land was going, this will turn into an insurgency. What do we end up doing? We end up using Snatch Land Rovers, same as we did in Iraq. Yeah, how many dead people did it take before that urgent operational requirement went in and we started getting MRAPs? So, as always, it takes dead people.
Lessons written in blood.
If you're thinking of joining the military, never be under any illusions that the kit that you'll get will be good, but it won't be the best, right? Because it won't be. It will need you or someone like you to die in order for that really good stuff to start coming online. And where projects take years, suddenly, because the public are in an outcry about the number of casualties, it will miraculously take weeks. That's why urgent operational requirements issued by the MOD tend to produce really good stuff, right? Not because the government cares about you, but because the public are really fucking angry that so many of you are getting killed. How does that translate to today? Well, the lessons, as we've seen in the Black Sea, are clear. USVs are going to be a real drama. They're going to fundamentally alter how we operate in the littoral environment. UAVs, the Turkish Navy is building a UAV platform to go to sea. Is there an appetite to spend that kind of money? An aircraft carrier dedicated to operating uncrewed vessels? No, the Royal Navy is looking at uncrewed vessels, uncrewed platforms for Prince of Wales and Queen Elizabeth. But only because we can't afford manned airborne early warning aircraft. We've got Crow's Nest finally flying, but that's got a service life of 5 years. They're already talking about Crow's Nest airborne early warning platform going out of service. We haven't got a tanker.
I mean, the UK's got a problem with just spending, isn't it? We are as where we spend our time talking quite often. Commonly it's just about how little our government is prepared to invest in defence, and how it sees defence as a cost as opposed to the insurance policy it should be.
Yeah, in 1982, on conclusion of the Falklands campaign, the Royal Navy went from famine to feast, and there was a urgent request from the US to buy Phalanx, and we were sticking it on Type 42s as fast as we could get them. We were replacing boats. So prior to 1982, it was decided that, well, close-in weapon systems aren't really needed, and you really need a captain's launch, because you need the captain to be able to go ashore in a bit of style. 2 Type 42s and 2 Type 21s later, now we need Phalanx. Well, in 1981, I could have told you that. All right, it was a new system. US Navy had only been rolling it out since the late 70s. But the Royal Navy's job was to go into the Norwegian Sea, with a carrier group and face off against bears, backfires, and badgers. So a close-in weapon system was always going to be a really sensible bit of kit for us to carry, but the money wasn't there. And there was an operational requirement for it. 1983, 84, 85, 86, and then through to 1990, and then every swinging deck is getting close-in weapon systems on board. Type 22 frigates, suddenly they get a gun on the front because the gun was obsolete in 1981, and in 1983, everyone needs a 4.5 gun on the front. It was extended so you could stick a goalkeeper close-in weapon system on board. Twin and single 30mm guns were appearing everywhere. If there was space, we were sticking them on board warships.
You know, Gunny, you're so right. We went through the same exact lesson in tactical air at the beginning of the Vietnam War. It's all going to be missiles. It's all going to be attacking bombers. There's not going to be any fighter-on-fighter engagements anymore. And they found out, they found out two things. One, you still need guns. Yeah, the majority of the shoot downs were done with missiles, but what had really gone away was the ability to do basic fighter maneuvering. All the gunnery schools had shut down in the USN, and that's what led eventually to Top Gun being formed, to teach people how to fight again, and then to send each one, a person from each squadron would go out and become the subject matter expert at their squadron from this central location. We had to teach people how to fight again, and the Air Force came up with their version of that, and Red Flag, and being their tactical weapons school. And as you said, the pendulum always swings, and we're mid-swing right now. We've hit the outer edge. I hope we're coming back, and I really hope the RN and the USN and all the armed forces start to focus on lethality and not anything other than that to guarantee the safety.
And training.
And training, yeah. Well, as part of lethality, give them something.
I mean, I think just before the Second World War, the U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy did anti-aircraft gunnery trials. The U.S. Navy had to stop firing at remote targets because they kept killing them, and we weren't getting a shot in. Now, in the late 1930s, it was blatantly apparent that HCAS, our anti-aircraft gunnery system, was not fit for purpose, and we hadn't been carrying out realistic gunnery shoots. U.S. Navy had taken an opposite kind of approach to it and went, well, yeah, it's expensive converting old manned aircraft to remotely piloted vehicles, but it's going to pay off in the long run because we're going to get some realistic gunnery practice into it. Fast forward through to now, and as we said earlier, David, the Royal Navy's gunnery practice sometimes involves a huge inflatable red target, and we ditch that over the side. And we were doing this in the 1990s, or a shoot against a flare. That's not going to train me to be a gunner, right? That's just going to prove that the gun works. And the one place that we did realistic gunnery training, which, as the Russians have learned the hard way, you need to be able to get rounds on target quickly. You need to be able to illuminate those targets that get inside radar range so you can indicate and direct. You need a close-in weapon system that can be properly controlled from a local aiming site, because the radar won't pick these things up. When we saw Ivanets, the Tarantul class corvette getting hit, her AK-630 multiple gun system was working. It was firing. They just couldn't get it onto target. That's a USV killer. That system could kill USVs very easily, but they just couldn't get it there.
They probably had the range gates all wrong, and but you're right. It can easily be modified to do the job. It just takes the will.
Yeah, and you don't want a system where it's going to take 8, 9, 10, 12.7 going through a USV to kill it. You want a gun system that will kill it with one rounder. You need to be the ability to rapidly shift target left, shift target right. And you need the ability to hold multiple targets and preferably outrange. So you want something 30, 40 millimeter. something like that. Or, I mean, the RN tried single 30mm with Martlet launchers on the side, so that the aimer, using optics, could identify a target, fire a Martlet missile at it, and then engage with a gun. And we've been that, apparently, because there's a problem with the efflux from the missile on the superstructure. Well, come on. I mean, this is the 21st century. I'm sure there's a way that we could put screening up so the superstructure wasn't damaged.
It's just an engineering problem. Those are fixable.
Yeah. And that's a gun. If you take a 30mm with 4 or 6 Martlet rounds and a good optical aiming system with good night vision on it, that's a USV killer. What do you want to? Do you want to lose the frigate, or do you want some damage to the paintwork? Well,
you look at some of these action sequences, from World War II, and you just see all sorts of 20mm and 40mm just banging away, and that is that is a vision into the past. That is a little bit of our future.
yeah. Again, the wheel turns. Remote power control. So the Royal Navy went, well, it's great having a multiple barrel gun. Why not have an aimer off the mount? So it's actually, if we talk about the 16-barrel pom-pom, remote power control, you took the aimer, you took the mounting, you took the guns off it, and you made it a pom-pom without guns, but the pom-pom was slave to it. Now you can have more than one mount firing at a target. So the aimer can select whether one mounting fires at it, 2 mountings fire at it, and then he would just work through targets. Bang, 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 kill, shift target left, bang, 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 kill.
Yeah, this is not new. This is not new technology.
No, it's not. And a ship architect would turn around and say, well, yeah, but there's low observability as well. If we start sticking gun mounts on these things, then we increase the radar cross section. Your radar cross section ain't gonna fucking matter if 3 Magura 5s run into your starboard side and flood.
Yeah, I could agree with you more. And we have the ability to detect with radar the wakes of submerged submarines, if they're going above maybe 4 or 5 knots. How hard do you think it's going to be to spot a ship? Low observability on ships is a pig in a poke.
Yeah, we always used to laugh in the 90s because they said, well, one of the things we've done with ships is we've sloped the superstructure to reduce the cross section. Yeah, the ships don't roll, do they?
Oh no. That's awesome.
The one thing that occurs to me is how astonishingly poor the Russians are at their prior planning and all of that stuff, right? So when you're thinking about making a plan, you think about your plan A, your plan B, your plan Z, and they don't seem to plan at all. And that's the bit that's really astonished me, from being a Cold War warrior, as it were, or a Cold War idiot. In my day, one of the things we were always thought that the Russians or the Soviet Union and the Soviets were going to be coming over the hill quickly, and we were going to last about 3 minutes. And we're deeply, deeply misled, or the Russians have changed dramatically. And I'm really thinking that we were deeply misled, and I'm not entirely sure that this is something that they've dropped from. No doubt they will have been good at some things, or maybe many things, but the stuff we're seeing looks so systematic. It's just systematic with it. It's a system-wide problem that they have, and I think these are the things that we need to learn from it. that we've given too much credibility to their abilities instead of giving ourselves credibility for ours.
I think, I mean, it goes back to, as we said earlier, no firm plan for action. In terms of planning large scale operations, institutionally unable to do it. No realistic training, no contingency planning. Stuff like tactical data links. Radars are subperforming. So for everything that you will read on the internet, the kit is just not up to scratch. And you will still see the fanboy kind of, 3 years in, people saying, well, they've deployed S500. And that is a game changer. Well, what the fuck makes you say that? S400 was a game changer. S300 was a game changer. A50U was supposed to be an E3 Sentry with bells and whistles on it. SU-35 was supposed to be phenomenal aircraft. How many times do we have to look at this kit and look at their performance and go, right, we need to reassess how good they are? Now, there are some things that they are good at. Electronic warfare, apparently, they're still pretty good at. Submarine operations, talk to any submariner. They are not slack at that. They're not very good in the Black Sea. Northern Fleet, completely different ball game. And flag officer submarines from a while ago said, look, they're pretty good. Then they're not amateurs at this game. That's a one field of naval warfare that they do know their stuff at. But as for the rest of it, I think they've been subpar. I think the only reason they haven't been more embarrassed is the AFU haven't been given the kit to embarrass them. They've been embarrassed by a force that's been hamstrung by a lack of technology coming in. The reasons for that, well, that's an argument for another day. Has there been an overwhelming drive in the West, not or certainly the States, not to embarrass Russia too much for fear of them going to CBRN as a last resort? I think that's probably reasonable. Has our investment in technology and things like force multipliers been validated by this? Absolutely. You only have to look at the work. If you remember the first few weeks of Ukrainian army anti-armor teams with Javelin in-laws and seeing their shoot and scoot tactics, how they slowed down Russian spearheads, then stopped them, then used various means to hit them with artillery, really used terrain to their advantage, traded space for time. Unfortunately, that policy kind of didn't hold, and then they went to a defend everything as much as possible. A mistake in
they went back to a Soviet style instead of they were previously a guerrilla type tactics, and then moved to more of the same Soviet style attritional warfare.
Yeah, but probably driven by an urge to keep as much territory as they seeing on the future a peace deal, which ultimately is not going to be in Ukraine's favor. They're going to end up losing territory. That's not right. That's not fair. But for the West, that's realpolitik, and that's going to be driven by the US. I don't like it more than anyone else. But yeah, has it validated technology over numbers? Yeah, absolutely. Will the Russians bounce back from this? Yeah. Yeah, they will do. That's in the nature of military. You learn lessons, and then you come back bigger and better.
Especially if we give them the time to do that.
Yeah, 3 years, maybe 5. They're talking up a war economy. They've captured enough kit that they're going to incorporate certain improvements. There is going to be a hardcore senior NCOs and junior level officers who are battle experienced. if they've got any sense, they'll incorporate them into colleges, into war academies. And as in 1941, in the winter of 1941, when the Russian army was on its chin strap 4 years later, it was a fundamentally different force. Russian Navy, have they had a steep learning curve? Yep, absolutely. Will they learn from this? I suspect it will take longer, and I think it will be easily countered by the Ukrainian Navy and Air Force when they get good kit in, like P8, like corvettes, lots of fast attack boats, shore-based anti-ship missiles, and they'll be able to manage that threat. But overall, yeah, it's been a shocker for the Black Sea Flotilla, an absolute shocker. I don't understand what their thinking was. I don't understand why they didn't adapt to the new threats around them. The USVs, certainly, there's no excuse. You can look at how some of these ships were sunk by USVs, and you're just scratching your head, going, even the basics. As I said, all your upper deck lighting on at night, you're just begging for it. Fine, USVs have got night vision equipment, but why make a gift of it? Why send unescorted assault ships around a high threat USV area? Why stick a Kilo class submarine into a dry dock in Sevastopol when you know that it's within Storm Shadow scout range, and you know that platform is high value? Just you know, thoroughly unprofessional. But as I said, they'll bounce back, and we need to be ready for it.